Hi, I'm Jennifer Campbell, creator and host of the Systemic Leadership Summit. Welcome to this session, and in today's session, we'll explore the liminal and what this means for leadership in living human systems. We will discuss this topic with someone who is part of a generation of exceptionally intelligent minds and with whom I've had already the privilege of co-creating 2 sessions for the Systemic Leadership Summit before this one, and her name is Nora Bateson. Nora is a research designer, independent filmmaker, writer, and lecturer. She is also Gregory Bateson's youngest daughter. Nora considers herself a professional interloper as she engages in conversations in different disciplines and with different audiences. One result of that is the International Bateson Institute, designed to bring together the sciences, arts, and vocational wisdoms to create a focused qualitative inquiry of the integration of life. Asking how can we improve our perception of the complexity we live within so we may improve our interaction with the world, Nora Bateson has also developed curriculum for schools in Northern California and produced and directed award-winning multimedia projects on intercultural understanding. Nora is the writer, director, and producer of the award-winning documentary An Ecology of Mind, a portrait of her father, Gregory Bateson's way of thinking. Currently, Nora is traveling worldwide, holding conversations and conducting seminars with international change makers, ecologists, anthropologists, psychologists, designers, IT people, and countless other groups. Nora's latest book is called Small Arcs of Larger Circles, Framing Through Other Patterns. And one of her latest articles is called Liminal Leadership, which was published in Cosmos, the Journal for Global Transformation, and which lies at the core of our session today. So I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to you, Nora. Thank you so much for being with us again in the Systemic Leadership Summit.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's so good to be here, and I just have to tell you how much I appreciate your work and these conversations, and what a wonderful thing it is that you are doing to open up a space for new dialogue to take place and to just forge out into the unknown. And in doing that, you know, I recognize and I definitely want to honor the fact that when we're dealing with creating new voices, generating new ideas, developing new spaces for contextual information, one of the first barriers is the institutional barrier that says, but we've never done this before. It doesn't exist anywhere. And I know with my own work that one of the drawbacks to working with systemic material is that it fits both nowhere and everywhere.
Yeah.
Even when people ask me what I do, I get kind of caught because they want to know what field I'm in.
Yes.
And I'm in the field of fields, and we don't have a public context for the context. And so I just want to recognize what you do as a really important beginning of that space. So thank you, and it's an honor to be here.
Thank you so much, Nora, and I feel honored to speak to you and to speak to other speakers and clients and create these new dialogues together.
You know, it's, you know, for our listeners or watchers out there, this could seem like a kind of ping pong of platitudes going on right now, but reality check, it's not. I mean, what's really happening is pretty revolutionary. Because so much of what happens with communication gets chalked up to what is said or what is not said. And that's a huge mistake. because the question is not what did you say or what did he say or what does it say in The Guardian or The Observer or the New York Times. The question is, what is it possible to say?
Yeah.
Okay, and that's the boundary we're pushing here. And so this is an act of evolution, revolution, devolution, whatever you want to call it, in a really critical way to this concept, I think, of what we're talking about today, which is liminal leadership.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We're going into the space in between. Jennifer's program is not under the auspices or the umbrella of some existing institutional media framework. Therefore, she has to do all the work herself, find all the funding herself, create all the technology, and find the people and generate the questions and basically redraw the universe of what it's possible to talk about in your own way. And what you're doing is actually going into that in-between space and claiming it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not easy. I know that it's not easy. I work there too. And there's nothing to hold you up. There's no existing framework. There's no guaranteed paychecks. There's no retirement funds. There's no healthcare plans. There's none of that. There's just the wide open space.
Right, right. And the wide open space is on one hand, there's no structure and nothing to hold you up. And on the other hand, at least to me, I find it such an intriguing space because there is exploration and there is new meaning generation somehow. And there is connecting of things that weren't connected before. So yeah, looking forward to exploring the liminal with you in this session, Nora. And just to help everyone who's watching to plunge into this liminal space, we're talking about liminal leadership, and it's a combination of two words. And if we start with the liminal first, why I was so drawn to your article about liminal leadership is that I just recently read a book not so long ago by Dave Gray about liminal thinking. And I would like to know what you think of his description of liminal or liminal thinking. And he says, and I quote, "The word liminal comes from a Latin root that means threshold. Literally, a threshold is a doorway. But a threshold is also the beginning of every journey. A threshold is a boundary that marks a point of transition between one state and another." And then liminal thinking, he said, is the art of creating change by understanding, shaping, and reframing beliefs. It's about the ability to minimize reality distortion, improve understanding, and open up new possibilities for positive change in your work and life. And I was blown away by that. I was just wondering, what do you think? What hits home for you?
Okay, but let's start sort of at the beginning. It's okay, because I think it's important to sort of note that we are now talking about the liminal. 5 years ago, we weren't really talking about the liminal. 10 years ago, we really weren't talking about the liminal. And now it's coming in a more familiar and frequent way. If you look up liminal, the dictionary says that it's relating to a transitional or initial stage of process, or it's occupying a position at or on both sides of a boundary or a threshold. So I like to think of liminal as kind of like a twilight space. It's sort of in the in-between. adolescence is kind of the liminal space between childhood and adulthood. The reason that I wanted to, as I said, start at the beginning, is that there has been a kind of linear trajectory of discourse and of projected visions and a horizon of kind of the timeline in which people have, for a long time, estimated that there would be a kind of a discombobulation of a lot of the systems that we live within.
Yeah.
Those systems including economic systems, ecological systems, cultural frames, etc. So it's become kind of a habit to think of that change as something that's happening in the future. When the change comes, with the morning we wake up and nothing works anymore, or that there's, some stark contrast of, I don't know, apocalypse, whatever you want to call it. But the systems change is here. You're going to get the memo, systems change is here. But in reality, that's not what's going to happen. Systems, by definition, are complex, which is to say they have lots of aspects that are in process together. Those processes hold the system together with their process. Okay, so as an example, our education system helps hold our employment system, helps hold our economic system, helps hold our political system, helps hold our media systems, helps hold our culture, and then you could start that from any direction and recircle around all those institutional processes. Mm-hmm. And you can see that they kind of form this Gordian knot of ways in which our world gets from one day to the next.
Yeah.
Okay. So change, or even discombobulation of these systemic and intersystemic processes, is not going to look like a biblical apocalypse. Unless those boys push buttons. It's not going to look like a biblical apocalypse. It's going to sneak up on you. Mm-hmm. It's going to look, like that famous metaphor of the frog in the pot. Mm-hmm. Put the frog in the pot and the water's cold and the frog doesn't notice as the water slowly gets hot, and then pretty soon the frog is boiled. So I think what Dave is doing and what I'm doing also is pointing to the fact that we're already there. We have begun the process in which there's a kind of confusion that is coming, that we are in, that you can see it everywhere. Mm-hmm. How did Trump win? How did Brexit happen? What happened? What's going on? How is it possible that there are neo-Nazi groups? How is it possible that we're talking about white supremacy? What happened? What's going on? So there's this confusion. Mm-hmm. The confusion is a message that we are in the in-between already. We're there. It has begun. We are in the space between knowing the structures and knowing how to be and what's expected of us in one set of systemic frames, mm-hmm. and not even having the imagination to vision what another sort of systemic frames would look like, feel like, act like, be like, taste like, smell like, cost, feel, right? We'd have no idea where we're going. Right. So I think that's why what we're doing is kind of groping around in the dark now.
Yeah.
Or where are we? Where are we going? And really asking these questions about sense making. Because the things that used to be rational and reasonable are not.
Right.
Anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
And I like to comment on this part where you say we have the tendency to find a rational space, a space where things still make sense. And it reminds me of how you start your article about liminal leadership, where you say, "This is an unreasonable article. I'm becoming less fixed on presenting a rational strategy despite the accusations of idealism, because a rational strategy will just elicit more rational discussion or rationalized discussions. Whereas if we find ourselves in the dark, in the chaos, then rationality is not going to help us make sense of the chaos. It's more about asking questions that are going to help us be in the chaos, be in this in-between space. Because it's a muscle that we haven't practiced enough, and now we are forced to be in that because the older systems are no longer working.
Exactly. And we don't know what we're looking for. So, what is it to be rational in an irrational world? What is it to be sane in an insane world? I think the danger of the rational approach right now is that it will look like, how do we perpetuate the existing systems?
Yeah.
And the existing systems are leading us in no slow pace toward a kind of a species suicide.
Yeah.
So that's not rational, actually. It's not rational to continue to justify all the economic reasons why exploitation is okay. It's just not rational. We have got to understand the interdependency that life requires between species, between generations, between cultures, or we die, right? So much of our economic and political systems are set up to justify, validate, and implement activities that are rooted in exploitation, from our agriculture to our labor to discussions. I mean, why do we have a war industry?
Right.
Okay, so basically these are the sort of irrational aspects of life that we have to deal with, but to deal with them is to say, you know what? Your right to make money does not supersede life. Okay, the right to make money and to have influence and to be successful or wealthy or has been given a kind of carte blanche to exploit whatever you need, take what you need, rape the earth, rape the people, go ahead, take what you need. That's all in the name of profit. And I mean, even within the ecological movement and the alarm around climate change, so many of my nearest and dearest friends truly believe that in order to make change in our interaction with the environment, we have to make it profitable to use green products.
Right.
Okay? And that's actually not rational anymore. I mean, there comes a point where what you have to say is, no. The rational thing to do at this point is to recognize that the world is in a state that requires caregiving. And no one's going to get rich on caregiving. The process and the purpose and the generative nature of caregiving is outside the entire body of ideas that have to do with profit.
Right. So if we zoom out for a second and to really look at what you just said, here we are, mankind, and what we've built so far is, amongst so many other things, but is a pattern where making money supersedes the rationale of what is needed to survive as a species in the first place, and to preserve the earth in the first place. And so where there is a tendency to be rational, there's also, in a twisted way, a rationalization of an irrational process.
Exactly.
That we've been upholding, and that has been fed, and that the process sort of took over and is now doing everything in its power to stay in place, and that all these institutions are also doing everything to make sure that this process continues. And ultimately, it has nothing to do with the evolution of mankind or the further existence of the earth. It has nothing to do with it. And so, in that sense, I understand that you start your article by saying this article is not reasonable, and I am stepping away from a rational strategy. But I feel that we're even not in a space of rationality. We are just in a space of rationalized processes that in the end are not serving all of us.
I totally agree. I absolutely agree with you, Jennifer. And, the thing is that sometimes I'm having conversations with people and they shut me down.
Yeah.
And they say, yeah, but that's not reasonable. You're never going to get anywhere with that. No one's going to understand that. That's abstract. Why would anybody engage in that process when they're not going to make any money? What's the reason? So, this is where that liminal thing comes in. Mm-hmm. Because, yes, we do still live in a world in which you and I are paying rent and buying groceries, and we need monetary material asset to get from one day to the next. That is reasonable. Mm-hmm. I mean, without that, my children starve, right?
Yeah.
Okay. However, we are also in the beginnings of the phase of imagining other patterns and trying to prepare to live in other patterns, to give vocabulary and articulation to those other patterns that exist outside this form of rationality. Because this rationality, as you so succinctly just said, is irrational. Mm-hmm. It's deadly. Yeah. And that's not good. So this is what my father called a double bind.
Right.
Okay. And a double bind is basically something like a catch-22. You can't live with it. You can't live without it. But the stakes are higher. And part of a double bind is the aspect of not being able to talk about it. All right. So I have had a lot of conversations recently with people with whom I have been discussing democracy.
Right.
For example. Mm-hmm. And saying, we have a problem. I really want democracy to work, but we have a problem. And one of the problems with democracy is that it's very difficult to know what the will of the people is when the information they've been given has been stilted.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay? So, and also when the political framework has been so contaminated by whatever you want to call it, lobbying or various forms of corruption, I mean, basically, right?
Right.
That it's bought and paid for. So, really, we have a problem with democracy. And people get defensive because, for couple hundred years now, we've been working on this project of democracy in the United States in its particular form, but, globally, really, since a couple thousand years. And they say, well, you can't possibly mean you don't want democracy. Democracy is the best alternative there is. And boom, you're shut down. Okay? And really what I'm trying to do is open that up and say, I don't know where it's going, but I do know that we cannot just pop back into that frame of, but democracy is the best thing we've got, because we've got to recognize that the thing is changing. Right. And we're the ones that are here. We're here. Okay, our forefathers aren't here to deal with this, and the next generations haven't come in yet to show us what happened. So we're the ones in the liminal space. We're the ones who are on the bridge between old ways of life and new ways of life. Yeah. And we just don't even know what it looks like yet. We don't know what we're looking for. Mm-hmm. We don't know how to find it. We don't know how to talk about it. There's a great example that I like to use of this because, it kind of seems like, given all the beautiful, brilliant human beings and the experience of humanity that we have to draw from, that there should be someone who knew something. Mm-hmm. Somebody must have written this down somewhere, right? But this experience of sense-making is something that reaches beyond just intellectual perception.
Right.
Okay, so this is deep stuff, and it integrates multiple forms of cognition and ways of understanding our world. Mm-hmm. So I grew up on the mountainsides of Northern California, and I learned somehow, not because someone told me, but somehow I learned what it means to be walking around on those hillsides and when to keep your eyes open and be aware there could be rattlesnakes. Okay, there's a certain kind of something. There's a kind of light. There's a kind of coolness in the air that contrasts with the warmth on the ground that comes after a cool night. There's a kind of sunlight. There's a sort of, there's a time and a place and a kind of something that brings a lot of different ways of knowing together, that says, watch out, because this is the kind of time there will be a rattlesnake sitting on the path warming himself or herself.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And they blend in, so they're difficult to see. And if you don't know to look out for them, you could step on one and you could be really sorry that happened.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have that knowing in me. Mm-hmm. My husband is from Sweden. He does not have that knowing. Mm-hmm. He has no idea, walking down a path on a mountainside in Northern California, how to know when to even look for a rattlesnake. Right? It's not that he doesn't see it. He doesn't even know when to look, because he doesn't know what those culmination of sensibilities are.
Yes.
Okay? When I'm driving down the road in Sweden at dusk, very often he will say to me, can you start looking out? Be careful, because there could be a moose. Mm-hmm. And the way you look for moose, he tries to tell me, is that you look behind the first row of trees on the side of the road. Behind the first row of trees. Okay, listen. A moose is not a small animal. And there have been several occasions in which there was, basically a couple thousand-pound animal lurking right there, ready to step out in front of the car, and I didn't see it at all.
Right.
Okay? The reason I didn't see it is that I don't have those forms of perception in my body in my culture, in my intellect, in my experience. I have never had to use those forms of perception. So I'm telling you, the moose was there.
Yeah.
And likewise, when we're in California, the rattlesnake is there. But he couldn't see it, and I couldn't see it. And this is the kind of thing we're talking about.
Right.
Is going into the space where, you know, like in our intercultural marriage, we're in a liminal place. I can't see what he sees. He can't see what I see. And those are just like blatant examples. There's also all sorts of other things that I taste, he doesn't taste, things that I crave, he doesn't crave, things that I, right?
Right. What I love about this example is, because you were talking about before about democracy, and within the context of the Systemic Leadership Summit, we've been talking about deep democracy, and part of deep democracy practice, as I like to call it now, is to the importance of hearing all the voices. And now you're talking about your personal example where you and Barry have different contextual, process-based information, meaning-giving in your entire being. And you know exactly when the snake or when the moose show up, depending on who's who and who has what. And being able to share that information, even though the part of the moose may never be part of your inner context, you have someone there to help you when you're traveling in the car together. And so the deep democratic process can take place once there's this exchange of this contextual, meaning-giving information, where you can say, oh, you can be, I'm inviting you to be part of my context, so that you can then be aware of the moose and make sure that they don't step in front of the car when you're driving. And equally so, what I find intriguing is when we are talking about democracy, when you said, okay, I would like to explore what it means to step away from democracy and away from the thought that that's the best thing, and then that sort of stops the discussion. It's about inviting the voice in that's saying, we are in a space where democracy may not be the best solution that we have. It may have been part of the contextual information that we've had earlier, just like you have the contextual information about the snakes. But we are no longer in California.
Exactly.
We are no longer in Sweden, where we are driving our cars and we need to watch out for a moose. But we are in a space where we don't know where to define it yet. So the contextual meaning giving that can be part of our bodies is not there yet. So what it brings me, I find so fascinating, is what you say is, instead of closing down again and shutting our own inner systems and not exploring, not letting new information in, is not going to help us be in the liminal. It's not going to help us be in the chaos, because there needs to be more meaning giving, more information coming in, so that at some point there's going to be where we step into the new, or where we at least get into our bodies how to deal with the liminal. So yeah, I find that fascinating, this example. Thank you for the examples. They make them tangible.
Yeah.
Discussing the liminal. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's that, the reality is we can't see yet where we're going.
No.
It's important to know where we came from, but not to project that into the future. other
Yes.
than to recognize that we have some mistakes have been made. But
That's
there's
putting it
also
lightly. I love that. Some mistakes.
mistakes have been made. And for me, the big one has to do ultimately with, and it comes back to perception.
Mm-hmm.
Is the world that we are perceiving objectifiable? And if it is, it's exploitable.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the perception around this interdependency is where it begins.
Yeah.
And that, okay, boom, I just dropped this little sentence and it's kind of abstract, but here's the thing, it's habituated. So with all the best intention, we can set out to fix the education system. Mm-hmm. We know, okay, if we're going to have a group of people, a next generation that can perceive complexity, that can whatever, and in that, we'll call that see the rattlesnake or see the moose. Mm-hmm. All right? We can see what we can't see, because let's face it, our generation is not nearly adept enough at the kind of perception the next generation has to be. Mm-hmm. So this puts a big question mark over the framework of education. What do we actually have to offer?
Right.
Right? And how do we teach them to do things that we don't know how to do? How do I teach my kids to see the moose when I can't see the moose? Mm-hmm. Their survival is dependent on their being able to see the moose. But I don't know how to see the moose, and I'm in the position of teaching them. So that's a really good example for the problem of education. Right now.
Yeah. So, and what I did get from the examples that you described earlier is that what we do have, and that can be part of education, what we do have is our own learning and meaning giving as a process of how we contextualize things and how you learned about the snake and that process of, I got that into my body as I was walking, and I had all these, when the sun was like this and it smelled like this outside, and there was a certain humidity and there was a certain temperature and all that all informed me about the snake. Mm-hmm. And we can't teach the next generation about the snake because they're not in the context of the snake. But what may be helpful is the meaning giving, the how. What are your own ways of giving meaning, so that you, when you find yourself in a context where there is chaos and where there's the liminal and where there's the not knowing of where we're going, that will inform you so that at some point you will know about the not knowing.
I would not call that meaning making.
How would you call it then?
I think that what we need before meaning making is sensitivity. Uh-huh. And the reason that I'm pulling that out as kind of what comes first is that it's no accident that so much of the world is on various pharmaceutical forms of numbing medications.
Yeah.
Okay. As living systems, which each of us are in our physical bodies and with our families and in our lives and in interaction with our ecologies, the confusion that we're in is painful. And we don't know what to do with the confusion, and we don't know what to do with the pain. And so one of the things that's happening is that it's becoming increasingly evident that people just want to be numb. And in order to get where we're going, what we actually need is more sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
So what's important about, those moments of seeing a moose or a rattlesnake or wandering inside this liminal space is the sensitivity, the recognition, the beginnings of laying new maps, finding new milestones, finding new pieces to focus and concentrate and let things build upon, and to have that sensitivity be really a priority. And because I don't know how we're going to do it without it. And if people are feeling like they need to be numb, which I totally understand, actually. You can't take it all in. And there's definitely been days, especially in the past couple of years for me, when I thought, actually, I just want to watch Netflix for a few hours. I can't hold this anymore. There's so much information and it's so heavy, and I can't stay whole. I can't keep my own equanimity if I am really wide open and raw to all of this painful information. So I need to protect myself a little bit. Mm-hmm. But then I have to step back out and I have to take all those shields off again and go back and be ready to be that, the naked warrior princess out there, ready to meet with all sensitivity, emotional, physical, financial, like just in every possible way to be willing to perceive in new ways. And it's really not easy. And, that's why with that article, it sort of says, at the end of it, can you hold the door open for those of us that are, and pull the glass from our souls, because it's painful. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be painful. And, people who are willing to go out there and do that are going to get beat up. And it takes a lot of recuperation and knowing when enough is enough. And how are we supposed to know? I don't know when enough is enough. I mean, I definitely took in too much when the Me Too thing started. I don't know how you dealt with that, but I found myself just reading all these articles and getting more and more involved with it, because this was, okay, that's a new sensitivity. That's an example of suddenly there's language, suddenly there's recognition, suddenly globally there's a cultural sensitivity to something that wasn't there a year ago.
Right.
Okay, all the abuse has been there for forever, but the cultural sensitivity and the vocabulary of the hashtag #MeToo opened it up into a new, now we can see that moose. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We can name it.
Yeah.
It's right there. You don't have to worry about it. We don't have to grope around in the dark for, the reasons why we didn't say anything. Well, no one says anything, and right. We know that. But when that came out, it was painful.
Yeah.
Seeing all these women write their stories and that hashtag #MeToo just popping up absolutely everywhere.
Yeah.
And knowing my own stories and the stories of the women that I am close to and my daughters and my, was like, it hurt.
Yeah.
It hurt a lot. Mm-hmm. So reviving that sensitivity in places where we have shut down is likely to be a painful process. It's also full of vitality.
Yeah.
Okay? So, it will hurt, but it's also full of healing and vitality and possibility and all of the, it's like when you have been sitting for a long time and your leg falls asleep. Mm-hmm. And you stand up and the blood rushes in and it kind of tingles and it's a little bit painful for a minute, but then there's all this life back there again.
Right.
It's like that.
It's like that. Yeah, and this is, I just want to stay here and summarize for a second, because what you said earlier is we were talking about being informed in your whole body, in your own system as a living human system, based on your experiences, and being in the ecology of things with the snake and the moose. And you said, I wouldn't call that meaning giving. I would call that process of how that works. I would call that the step before is sensitivity. And what clicked for me is that we are, for one, living human systems who inform ourselves through our senses.
Right.
And then the word sense making also popped up for me.
Right.
I was like,
Right.
oh, because sense making, when we say that makes sense, we usually refer to something that, okay, that's logical, that's rational. But actually, sense making is about having the sensitivity first.
Yes.
And using the
Exactly.
senses. And then the combination of the information that comes through the senses is what then goes into the making, into life, into the vitality, into the as if something new comes into being simply because it goes through our senses.
Exactly.
So thank you for that. It just clicked for me, like, sense making is actually not a rational thing.
It's not rational.
It's about the senses. That's what it's about.
And the senses cross.
Mm-hmm.
So finding new ways of sense making, I could get with that. Let's do sense making instead of meaning making.
Mm-hmm.
Or we can. There's a piece that I'm working on right now,
Mm-hmm.
and it's called Making Senses.
Okay. Well, we're in the same space.
Yeah.
Walking next to you in California or in Sweden.
And how we are making senses, and that there's got to be more than one sense.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And that brings us back to, why we need each other, why it's important to enter the liminal space.
Yeah.
So this notion of liminal leadership, whatever, really it's about getting outside the indoctrination of various institutional processes of rationalized leadership and sense making. So what makes sense to the education system right now is to prepare the next generations to be in an employment world that is actually irrelevant to the future.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So one of the things that pops up immediately is, oh yeah, that's true, because what the next generations are going to need is they're going to need to know how to do things online.
Right.
No. That was what I had in mind, actually. That's kind of more of the same.
Yeah.
Right? So how would we think about, I'm using the education system not because I'm fixating on it, but because it's one institution of many. We could also talk about the economic system and the institutions around that, and the sense that the way that the economic world makes sense of our biological and cultural living systems is as possible capital gain.
Yeah.
Okay, we need a new sense making going on there. There is not enough sensitivity to what actually life is.
Right, right. And so this is what I'd love to comment about, and when I hear you say this, and when I look at your article, is that there's such tendency when we speak about leadership, that combination of liminal and then the second part, leadership, is that we have a tendency to point to the institutions and say, oh, the education system as an institution and is not working, and many people agree that it's not working, but we keep pointing. And what I see in your article, what you write, is that you say, on one hand, we keep pointing, but on the other hand, we do not seem to recognize that in our pointing, we are stopping ourselves or numbing ourselves from what is actually my part in this system we call the education system, that keeps it in place, that keeps it exactly where it is. Why do I exclude myself from the education system and share with my neighbor or share with anybody who wants to hear that I need to send my kids through this system, and I actually don't agree with it, but I'm doing it anyway, and I'm pointing at it because they are doing something that is not going to help them be in the liminal space. And that is, again, as I hear you now, is because the pointing at the institution is a numbing act, because we separate ourselves, because it's also painful once we discover, wait a minute, we are also part of the problem, just like the institution is the institution, but we are part of the institution.
Right. I mean, and also the education system is not a standalone.
No.
So you can't fix the education system by throwing money at the education system and creating new curricula.
No.
No, you have to create a world in which that curricula is relevant and rational and reasonable before you can have students that have a mandate to be proficient in that set of ideas.
Yeah.
Right? So where is the education system? Is it in the culture? Is it in the economic system? Is it in the, where is it? Mm. So if you want to, this is where I'm sort of pushing this, going, actually the change is not where you think it is.
No.
The symptom may be in the education system. The symptom may be in the economic system. The symptom may be in the corruption of politics, or, the binary fantasies of the media. Mm-hmm. But that's not where the problem is. The problem is in the way all of those things are coming together. And how are they coming together? What is the conduit, the gray matter through which these connections are taking place? Us.
Right.
We are the conduit. We are, if you were to take a whole bunch of electrical cords and put them in a pool to generate a lot of different things to turn on, we are the pool.
Right.
We are what's generating these processes. Yeah. So we can't point to the education system and say, why don't you change? Or even our politicians and say, why don't you change? Because that's us. And right now, getting back to why I was giving you kudos at the beginning of this session, this is what we have to do, is claim the unclaimed space of the liminal. Mm-hmm. And the good news is there's no rules. There's no directives. There's no one in charge. There's no hierarchy of old fogey, pillars of, tradition. There's nothing in the liminal space to stop us. The bad news is there's nothing in the liminal space to hold you up, to give you props, to tell you that you're doing anything that's worthwhile, to give you any financial remuneration. There's nothing there to boost you or to give you a title or an identity or to make you relevant in the world of institutions. Mm-hmm. So you step out. You lose your relevance.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not in academia. I don't work in academia, but I work with ideas. So who am I? Doesn't that mean that I don't have any credibility because I'm not inside the system? Or does that mean that I have more credibility because I'm not inside?
Yeah.
And, I know with my own kids, and what I've had to teach them is, look, for right now, you gotta be like those cowboys that ride on two horses. You gotta live in two worlds.
Yeah.
We have to be in both realms because you have to feed your family tomorrow, but you have to be building a new world for the day after tomorrow.
Right. Right.
And so, we have to do both right now. And it's a little bit skitsy, actually. There's a little bit of, well, this makes sense in this way, but that makes sense in this way. But these two sense-making processes are in total contradiction.
Right.
And we have to hold that contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
So we need each other.
Yes, we do.
And, yeah.
And so this is where it just really gets so interesting, because then we are also in this space because I'm still with the pointing at the institutions and the what got us here won't get us wherever it is that we need to be next, because there's no direction. And what do we do with leadership then? Because it's not what it used to be. Mm. And we are in the liminal space. We are in the space where more sensitivity would and could inform us. But leadership also is about it's this place where we look to when there is chaos. We look at leadership.
Or at least we have in the past.
Yes, we have. We
right.
have.
I think that's an important thing to recognize that, some of the patterns that we are talking about made sense in the past.
Yeah.
And they're not going to make sense in the future. So, I really think leadership is an old word and an old concept. Mm-hmm. And that if it's worth talking about, it's worth talking about because we do have the tendency to look there for direction and for guidance.
Yeah.
And since people are going to be looking there, we might as well have something in that place that says, oops, remember not to look here. Right? Out of order.
Yeah. Yeah.
Having said that, it's much more about contributing to the liminal space and validating the liminal space and holding open the context for the context and recognizing that which is not recognized by the institutional body and taking that risk and groping in the dark when the whole world says you should follow the lit path. Mm-hmm. That is leadership in the way that those old Norwegian ships, which I think is where the word comes from, they were the first ship that went through the ice, was the leadership. It was the ship that was ahead, breaking into the ice, going into the new territory, so that the others could come. Mm-hmm. And that is more like it, that it's more just, the willingness to be sensitive, to be tender, to be exposed, and to not know, and to be irrational. And that takes a lot to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not to look to leadership for guidance. It's to allow that notion of groping in the dark and finding new mooses and rattlesnakes to take place. Mm-hmm. And that's another thing.
Yeah, yeah. And now I understand better what you wrote in your article when you said, on one hand, we are part of the system, and we are part of the problem. It's us as the pool, and not so much the institutions that are more the symptoms. And on the other hand, you say, you ask the question, who will lead the way? Mm-hmm. And when I was preparing for this session, I was thinking, do we then need leaders to lead the liminal process? But as I understand you now, as you're explaining it now, is that, and this may also be because the space of language is only limited also, is that you're not saying we need more leaders. We need more we need more sense makers, or we need more who are willing to enter and stay in the liminal space, so that it can be an invitation for even more sense making, and for even more to explore the liminal realm. Mm-hmm. And do that together.
We can only do it together. Mm-hmm. I had this really profound moment this year talking to this, actually he's a Taoist master. And we were in a session on, how to save the world with 30 people from around the world that had been sort of gathered in this closed session on how we're going to save the world. And while we were sitting there, I got a text from my daughter. And this text came in, and she said, actually this was last year. She said, because it was right when the American University in Kabul was bombed. Mm-hmm. And she said, Mom, one of my friends from college just got killed in the bombing of the American University in Kabul. Wow. And I know you're sitting there with 30 people who are supposed to be helping us change the world. And I just would like to ask you to please hurry up. My friends are dying.
Yeah. Wow.
And it was, her timing couldn't have been perfect to have sent this, lightning bolt of truth into this group of people who had been waxing, a bit esoteric out in the abstractions of all that we could do to save the world and so on and so forth, and then in comes something really real, a text from your kid that says, can you please hurry up, the world's on fire. And the Taoist Master Chuang was his name, still is, said this thing that was so incredible. The room was quiet for a minute after I shared the text. And then he said, well, we've been studying the Tao for 3,500 years. Mm-hmm. And what we have to admit now, as we look at the possibility of our own species and thousands of others being destroyed, is that all that the human beings have done, all of human history, all that has been, while there is beauty in it and there's destruction in it, all that we know thus far, it's not enough. To get where we need to go, we have to do more. Mm-hmm. We have to go further.
Yeah.
And we have to go further quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I loved that because it was this incredible recognition of all that has gone in the past, but that it just wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough. And so that leaves us here, now, you and me and the 7 billion people we share the planet with, to think about where else we can go, what else we can know, how else we can sense each other and our world, what other sensitivity and possibilities we have for responding to the rattlesnakes and the moose.
Yeah.
Because we are not there yet. We didn't we're not there. We didn't graduate yet. It's not like we know everything we're supposed to know, Democracy is not a complete project.
No.
Humanity is not a complete project. So this is what's ahead of us. And we haven't got the foggiest idea even where to start, except for just to, like this painting behind me, there's this incredible vulnerability where we just have to say it wasn't enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now we're still naked.
Yes.
Yeah. So
it reminds me so much of what you also wrote about. I think you call it the three vignettes in your article.
Oh yeah.
With 3 different examples of one where the unfamiliarity of the liminal, that it's so something that we are inclined to move away from.
Mm.
So we'd rather just immediately, as we do our sense making, then rationalize it in an irrational way.
Yeah.
Or a rational one, but usually also in an irrational way, just so that we can stop feeling the pain of what's actually happening and go back to our desks and our laptops and our phones and our whatever that it is that we normally do, so that we need not occupy ourselves with it.
Mm.
So being in the liminal space, it is unfamiliar, and it is what you're doing is inviting to be in it more together.
Well, I think there's a lot of life and vitality and everybody's so tired all the time and stressed out, and the process of mutual learning and discovery and enlivening and invigorating the senses and exploring new processes. I mean, that is so healthy and full of, maybe we don't need 3 cups of coffee in the day if we have more of that going on. Maybe we don't need those antidepressant pills if there's more of that going on. Maybe we don't need to, be substituting. I think intuitively and physically, we know that the way that we're living is not healthy for us. It hurts.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's kind of 2 sets of painful choices. One is to step out into the brokenness, and the other is to stay inside it. And either one of those is going to hurt a little bit. So you might as well take the one that's going to make you tingle all over again.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I just have a totally different. This is a sidetrack now.
Okay.
But it's just a totally different. We were talking earlier about the context and about experiences that go through your body, and I was, just as you said that, I was thinking of what happens when you come out of a sauna, go into the cold water to cool off, and then jump in a lukewarm pool, and how the shock, it's like the sleeping and then waking it up again. It's that same thing. And every time you cross a threshold of that extreme difference in temperature, it's stepping into that again. And
exactly.
The difference is that there you know what will happen. And you can have all kinds of opinions and ideas about it, and it will influence your decision making as to whether you then go into the cold pool or not. But here, in the liminal space, we do not. It's part of the experience to not know what you're stepping into.
And the only way you can deal with things that you don't know, of being in the dark, when you turn off the light and you start to walk down the hall or whatever, and you have that strange sensation that there's things in front of you. So there's like this hyper-sensitive way of being when you don't know where you are.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
Is that we have to have all senses on, all senses willing to register new sensations. And we have to do it together because we can't find it by ourselves.
Yeah.
And
before we close off, there is just a few more pieces I'd like to exchange with you. And one is about the together that you just said, about the interdependency. And in your article, you share 3 things that you feel that we need to remember about responding to interdependency. Because especially in our Western societies, we're so focused on us as individuals and the numbing of the interdependency.
Mm-hmm.
So could you speak to that more? What is it that, if we're going to step into this, if we're going to acknowledge the interdependency and do this together, what do you feel are things that we need to remember, or that are going to help us when we remember?
Well, I could answer that from a lot of different directions. So the first thing that I want to say about that is that the intergenerational relationship is so important.
Mm-hmm.
It is so important. And I don't feel that we have even begun to open that up yet. And I really feel strongly that we need to do that. And, I was sitting on an airplane recently, and there was a woman next to me who said, yeah, I really agree with you. It's so important that the young people be ready to hear the advice we have to give them. And I was like, no. That's not what I'm talking about at all. Sorry. But look at the world the older generations have created, and imagine for just a quick minute what kind of betrayal the younger generations are feeling right now. What ecology did you leave for them? What economy did you leave for them? What hope? What future? What form of peace? What have we done for our future generations? And the fact that we're willing to sit by on the sidelines and say, well, the future generations have their work cut out for them to, it's like, give me a break. We completely set this up. And by we, I'm willing to say that, I'm about to be 50. What in the world have I been doing for the last several decades? Even though I've been trying to deal with this, it wasn't until really very recently that I started to admit, no, it's not going to be incremental change. No one's going to make a living making the changes that need to happen. No, there's no way to both have petroleum and a future. Mm-hmm. No, it's actually not possible. So there's this sort of punk rock that has to come in of saying, really across generations, we need to have another kind of communication. And it actually starts with the older generation saying, like I said earlier, some mistakes have been made, right? Like the Taoist master said, it wasn't enough. Mm-hmm. There's no need for blame or, brutal punishment. But there is absolutely need for an opening. Yeah. To encourage younger generations right now to go into the marketplace and just start scrambling to make a buck, to buy a condo, to buy a car, to live that's craziness. So how are we going to support them? How are we going to caregive? How are we going to hold them? How are we going to be there for them as we make this change together? And that's really, I think that's so important, because we can't ask them to do this alone. And, at the same time, like my friend said to me recently, there never was a king that just stepped aside and let democracy happen. All right, so the old guard isn't historically very inclined to just step down.
No.
I get all these ads in my Facebook feed for this T-shirt that says the patriarchy isn't going to smash itself. Right? So, there's sort of two things going on there, but anything we can do, anyone who's inclined toward being able to ask those hard questions and admit that betrayal, I think they should. We need it. I'm looking at the three things that I said. Wicked problems require intersystemic change, not siloed solutions. Okay. So, to help the intergenerational change, which is also intercultural and interspecies. Mm-hmm. Okay? Yeah. So, this is not just about any particular aspect of life. This is about the whole thing. And that's sort of what I'm getting at, too, with this, intersystemic change instead of siloed solutions. But intersystemic change means that you don't have meetings inside the education community about how to change the education program.
Yeah.
Right? It can't change by itself. So there's a timing question. And the timing is going to have to be that it's like taking a your arm and sweeping it across the table and moving all the plates at once. Right? Everything's got to move at once here, or nothing's going to move at all.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? Number 2, taking action before perception change produces repeated errors and short circuits the necessary complexity. Ditch linear strategy. So many beautiful projects exist right now with the best incredible intention and the highest altruism of people who are investing in impact investment and so on and so forth. But the issue is that the solutions that are being generated are like the heads of a hydra.
Right.
They're just manifestations of deep systemic and intersystemic issues. And until we can really start talking about what the systemic stuff is, finding these solutions, however necessary they are, is only one small part of what we need to be doing. So, mandating that perception change. The problem is not that there are homeless people. The problem is not that there is an opiate epidemic. The problem is not that the climate is changing. The problem is not that there are immigrants and refugees. Those are not the problems. Those are the symptoms.
Right.
Of deep systemic problems. So what's connecting all of those things? And how do we get the people who are in the positions of discussion and discourse that are on the airwaves to say that? When it's not their job, it's not their department, and they know that they're going to upturn the existing system to say it. That's a problem. That's an issue.
Yeah.
All right? They're afraid of crashing the existing system because people will be hurt, and it's their job to maintain it. But if they don't crash the existing system, they're moving us closer to a crash of the existing system.
Right, right. So I'm just worried about what that means for your T-shirt. Because if the system is not going to crush itself,
right,
then if something else doesn't happen.
That T-shirt, by the way, is not my T-shirt. It's just the ad that I keep seeing. But it's not. Okay. Yes.
Well, that's probably not coincidental. So it's about it's that same thing again about when a problem occurs, we cannot solve it at the level where it originated from. So that's why it's not going to just smash itself. And so it's about the intersystemic. It's about the interconnectedness. It's about the non-linear.
Right.
And that's where we'll find it. And so we're back to the co-sense making.
Right. Which is this, like I'm saying, we have to do it all at once. And we don't have any existing platform for the all-at-once change-making program.
No.
I mean, there's the ecological change-making people, and there's the, wealth gap change-making people. There's the people who are revisioning the economy. There's the people who are thinking about social and human rights. There's the people who are, okay, but even they're not working together. Mm-hmm. The people who are vying for the rights of women are not working with the people who are vying for the rights of people of color. It's absurd, actually.
Right. So people are, I just want to rephrase this because I think this is such a vital point here. So what you're saying is people are not creating the connection in the space of the interconnected solutions. But people are coming together in the space of where the symptoms are. And in between is sort of where the problem is. So there's the symptoms, there's the problem, and then there's the interconnected possible solutions. And we are not organizing ourselves in that space where we can get to the interconnected solutions that are going to help us with the interconnected problems. But we find that we organize ourselves around the symptoms of the women or the people of color or the whatever it is. And then the strange thing is that by organizing ourselves around systems, we just create more meaning giving instead of sense making.
And all of the things that people are organizing around need every ounce of energy that they're getting. Mm-hmm. So maybe part of it is just that there's nothing left at the end of the day for the pot of how it all comes together.
Right.
But because I would never want to diminish the work that's being done. It needs to get done.
Yeah.
It's just that the collaborative effort would get at not just the heads of the Hydra, but the Hydra itself.
Right.
And that's really where we need to go. But when I have spoken to people who are political leaders, the first thing they say is, that's just way too abstract. No one can deal with that. And I have to tell you, I don't think it's abstract at all. I think it's absolutely practical. And I think the world is ready and aching for some people in leadership positions, existing old school leadership positions, like politicians, like pastors, like whatever they are. Those old school leadership positions need to start pointing people to the liminal space and saying, that's the mandate. That's what matters. It doesn't matter what political party you're a part of. It matters that we work towards systems change. It doesn't matter what religion you're in. It matters that we're working toward systems change, toward a change in perception of life and tenderness and giving for each other. Like it doesn't matter what category you're in. What matters is that you can see the meta and start to deal with it. And so that's, for me, and I don't think that that's abstract, but maybe I've lost the plot. Maybe I'm completely out of my mind. But when we see Brexit and we see Trump, one of the things we're seeing is what happens when we don't start the conversation in the meta.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that people get drilled down in all these crazy rabbit holes of destruction and separation, and they're isolating themselves increasingly in their various literally walled up frameworks because there's no way to talk about the larger space.
The larger space, yeah.
So what option have they been given, really?
Yes.
And if the options are you have to become a neoliberal or become, a nationalistic whatever, then that's no option at all.
No. So what you're saying is that because this is so wonderful, because this is one of the last questions I have in my preparation is, what does this mean for people in leadership roles? And you say that you invite them to point everyone in the direction of the liminal and to do this together so that we can break out of our fixed contexts that are not going to help us in more sense making, in smashing the bigger system that's no longer working for us.
And the thing is that to do that, it's going to take people with a lot of integrity and vision. Because what they're basically saying is, the institution that I represent, that has made me who I am, that has given me this platform upon which I will dictate to you whatever it is, has no relevance.
Yeah.
right? So the relevance is elsewhere, and we have to mandate that relevance, and that relevance is in the liminal space. It's in the space between people, between cultures, between species. It's in the space between generations. And basically what I'm saying is that they have to step down from their own position.
Yeah.
And discredit it in favor of larger systemic change.
Yeah.
And, you know, who's going to do that?
Yeah.
But whoever starts it is going to be great. And it just I can't believe we aren't there yet, though. I just don't know how close to the edge we're going to get before we start really hearing about systems change. Or are we just going to, you know, pop on over the cliff because nobody was willing to lose their relevance, their position, their prestige? I mean, this is the thing I hate about leadership.
Yeah.
Is that people consider themselves to be important, and the thing that made them important is actually got to go. So they are going to have to chop off their own, you know, that image of the dummy that's sitting on the limb of the tree with a saw cutting off the limb of the tree that they're sitting on. That's exactly what we need our leaders to do right now.
Right. Wow. This gets me to my last question.
Okay.
About you and me and about everyone who's watching. And that is, what do we do next?
Well,
what do we do next in our leadership roles? What do we do next in our opening up the space for the meta?
I mean, I think number one is, you know, kind of some of the stuff we've gone over, but it's not rational or reasonable. No one's going to make any money off it, and you're not going to get famous off it.
No.
So, you know, the reason for doing what needs to be done now is because it needs to be done. And so the value of what this work ahead is life itself, not your life or my comfortable living room or your comfortable living room, but life itself, for our species and thousands of others. So that's the first thing. It's not going to make any sense. To do what needs to be done now is not going to make any sense at that level, but it's going to make a lot of senses. And that's, I think, really important of increasing that sensitivity and recognizing that it's that this is a sensorial crisis that we're in.
Yeah.
And it's not that people are bad people. It's that the way that they are reading their world is leading them to the conclusion that it's okay to create further forms of exploitation.
Mm-hmm.
And to justify that with the frame of logic and rationality that is woven into our cultural, systemic, intersystemic processes, the undoing of that is right here. It's in us.
Yeah.
And if we don't pull it off, we don't pull it off. It just costs us everything.
Yeah.
And to pull it off, it's going to cost us everything.
Everything. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's where we are.
That's where we are. Nora, we've been talking about the liminal and about that space that is on one hand chaos and where we don't know where we're going, and that there is no indication, there's no one to point us, and that it's unfamiliar space, and that at least what clicks for me is that we are an interesting species, that we've created a system that is bringing us to an edge where we are hoping that it may smash itself, but it won't, because it's sustaining itself. And by staying in it, we are not sustaining ourselves and other species in the planet. And so the invitation is to, instead of the rationalizing processes that are mostly not rational, is to move into the liminal through sense making, and to do that together, to open our senses again. And in that togetherness, co-create intersystemic change. Because that's what the intersystemic needs. It's such a complexity that we can't do it on our own. We can't do it together. We can only do it together, and that means letting go of the old, letting go of the traditional benefits that, and these are my words, feed our egos in terms of status, in terms of prestige, but are not for the betterment of the evolution of us. And so the liminal leadership to me now is finding the space to let go of those benefits and to connect together, to step into the unknown.
Yep. I would say so.
Yeah. So thank you for this exploration.
It's always fun, Jennifer. I love our conversations.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I'm in that space right now. As I summarized everything, I'm still in it. Good. And I love invitations. And even though summits like these are becoming a little bit more familiar to me, it's also an invitation to everyone who's watching to keep stepping into it, as we've done in this conversation. So Nora, thanks so much for being on again.
Thank you. Anytime. I love doing this.
It's been an honor and a pleasure. And for everyone who's watching, let us know what you think. Let us know what your senses tell you after watching this session.
And you don't have to be rational. We don't have that as a criteria. Set yourself free. You can write your comments in poetry and images and whatever sense-making processes
that are going on. And there's at least one space where you can do that freely with others who also had this experience of watching this session. Again, thank you so much for watching, everyone. See you next time. Bye-bye.